So welcome to the live stream. This week we're going to be following up last week's live stream where we use the exact same Excel tool we're going to be using this time. And the focus of this video is really for people who are in their late teens and very early 20s, really more actually for people who are in high school. There's a lot of negativity out there around Gen Z's ability to achieve the American dream. And I will say that I think the concept of the American dream is changing. I think, Gen Z is a very entrepreneurial generation, and the American dream is really more focused for people who want to be employees. However, we're going to talk about the fact that it is possible to achieve the American dream, as it was historically considered. And so, if you've read The Millionaire Fast Lane, which we just covered recently on this channel, this is what would be considered a slow lane approach. But it is essentially risk-free, actually, the way that I've laid it out. And in fact, let me just share a little the Excel here. So here we go. We're back in the Excel file, and I'm just going to tell you there's a major video takeaway. We're going to get to that in about a minute. And then this right here is a detailed plan for people who watch to the end. So this is actually how you can achieve the American dream. And I'm going to call this the Slowlane Samurai Plan. And, that's just a little teaser. So if you stick around, you'll get to actually see the detailed plan. Okay, so we're going to assume you have or will be able to achieve $50,000 as your first year of earnings, right? And so this is actually higher than the average earnings. We're going to get to that. Basically, this is not assuming that you're going to be working 40 hours a week, not even close. If you're actually going to be able to pull this off in a reasonable time frame, that's one thing you're going to have to change. So this is not assuming if you're just the average person, you can achieve the American dream. The average Gen Z is not going to be able to achieve the American dream as it was traditionally considered, right? So we just got to get that out of the way. However, right, if you're making $50,000 now or about to be, because you're in high school or maybe, college, assuming you don't have like that and stuff, who knows? You're probably, if you're in this income, you're probably going to be spending 98% of your income. And we learned that in our last live stream where we talked about the different savings rates across the different income brackets. So we're going to assume 5% of your savings and net worth are going to go into stocks. And the reason why is basically this is just assuming that you have a employer matching plan, 401k, that kind of thing. It really doesn't matter. We're actually going to talk exactly why it doesn't matter. And we're going to assume that you have or are going to be able to get $5,000 is your ending net worth. Actually, for people, that are in their early 20s making, $50,000 a year, they actually usually have a negative net worth of about $2,000 in 2023 at least. But the thing is number one, we could start at 1. It's fine. The thing is, I don't want to put it as 0 or a negative because like some of my data tables get messed up. And I also really do think that it is possible for you to get $5,000. I think people just don't because they're not disciplined. And so we're basically assuming that this is how you're starting out. Okay, so the major video takeaway is essentially that if you're starting out with very little, let's say it's 1, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter. So if you're starting out with very little in the way of net worth, the biggest lever on increasing your wealth is actually increasing your savings rate, right? So if we drop spending, right, to, 93%, right? So it's a 5% improvement. You'll see that your ending wealth by 2030 goes from 13 to 30, right? That is the biggest lever you have at your disposal. Okay. And you can see as well that, allocating 5% more to stocks is not going to do anything. It's not even 1%. And increasing your return on your stocks, by 5%. So instead of earning 5%, as we're assuming now, you're going to earn 10%. That's only going to actually increase your ending wealth by 1%. And that's because you just don't have anything. Like you don't have this momentum of capital, right? And if you basically, if you increase your income by 5%, your spending is about 98%. Well, that's actually really only going to increase your ending wealth by 4%. That one is pretty straightforward, pretty much a one-to-one. So it's really all about the spending. It's really all about dropping your spending. So that's the thing you have to like really hammer home into people's heads, right? So it's like if you're not doing the millionaire fast lane approach, taking on a lot of risk by starting up a business that is able to scale up to, in the book, they say like, $10 million in 6 years, $10 million value in 6 years, which really means you're going to be doing somewhere between, 15 and $30 million of revenue in 6 years. And I know that because working on Wall Street, I understand how companies are valued on a multiples basis, right? So depending on margins and stuff like that, you're going to be doing, double digits, millions of revenue in order to achieve like a $10 million value in 6 years, right? So whatever the case may be, that's really your biggest lever. And so now that we've kind of covered this is the big takeaway, right? If you are in your late teens, early 20s, and you want to be an employee, if that's your strategy, you have to adopt. If you want to achieve the American dream, you have to. It's mathematically required that you save a hell of a lot more money than your peers, both on a percentage basis and on an absolute basis. So let's remind ourselves, right? Like if you're in the top 10% of income earners, right, you're making about 105, and this is for individuals, not for households. You'll see the household number, I think it's like 135 or something, but this is for individuals, so single people. It's about 105, right? So these people are saving on average about, $10,500 a year. That's not that much. Like that's not that much. So the point is you're going to have to adopt a savings rate that is much in excess of what is considered normal, because normal people are not going to be able to achieve the American dream. What is the American dream? It's like wife, family, house. Those are the big ones, right? And then also like being able to retire, right? And we'll touch briefly on the retirement thing at the very end. Here's the thing. Let's unveil the Slowlane Samurai Plan. And, I wanted to call this a Ronin plan, but we're going to call it a Samurai Plan. A Ronin is like a wandering, masterless samurai, like a young guy. The thing is, I just don't think people really know what a Ronin is unless you tell them. So we're going to call it the Samurai Plan. And here's the thing. The first thing you got to do is you got to add 30K a year of income. And how are you going to do this? It's very simple. You're going to be adding a side hustle, second job, something like that. And people are going to say, there's no way I can make 80 grand a year. Yes, you can, right? So let's look at this, right? 80 grand. If you're going to work 80 hours a week, 50 weeks of the year, that you have to make $20 an hour in order to make 80 grand a year. Okay. You can do that. Where can you do that? You can do that at call centers, post office, trucking, security guard, college admin work, warehouse work, bartending. There's a lot of places you could do that, right? Let's say that you're kind of like in an area that's lower cost of living maybe, but also lower on the income side of things, right? Okay, well, look, all you got to do then is you got to work 100 hours a week. And you're going to say that's not possible. I've done it for years. It sucks. It really sucks. But here's the thing is like you only have to do that for like the first 6 years. And that's a long time. But then again, look at this. You're on the slow lane here, right? If you want to be an employee, if you want to de-risk your ability to achieve the American dream, what's the trade-off for taking on less risk? It's working really hard and saving a ton of your money. Okay. So, if you're going to only make $16 an hour, you're going to have to work 100 hours a week. Sorry, that's just how it is. So the second thing you got to do is you got to drop your spending rate to 65%. And you're going to say, that's crazy. How am I going to afford that? Well, I'll tell you this much. So that reflects $36,000 a year of post-tax spend. Okay. On post-tax spend basis, I live in New York City. okay? And I spend less than that, okay? So it's possible for you. It's possible. I don't have roommates. I live alone in a studio apartment in New York City, and I am spending less than $36,000 a year after you remove taxes, okay? So you can do it. It's possible. And you see here, if you just do those two things, you will end up with over $200,000 at the end of 2030, right? So basically, if you do this right out of high school, you can, by the time you're 24, you can have $200,000, which is a ton of money. And then the next 6 years, what you got to do is this. So, and basically what we have here is we have your income growing by inflation, right? So we're going to just do this. We're going to adjust your income to what it was in the last year. And then basically, we're actually going to raise your spending rate to 75%. And the reason why we're going to do that is simple, is because in your first 6 years, if you're just going to spend $36,000, your social life will exist, but it will be minimal. You're pretty much going to sacrifice those first 6 years, and you're going to work like a dog. Frankly, you're going to work like a dog, and you're going to save like crazy. And so basically, we ended it with $202,000, right? We put our income right as it was in the last year. And then all we're going to do here is we're going to increase our stock portfolio to about 10%. So you're just putting a tiny bit extra in there. And this, and then also you have your money market portfolio, right? And so we're assuming that that's only getting like 2.5% return. So that's actually less than what we're projecting inflation to be in this scenario. So that's a very conservative number. If you're able to get, 3-4% in your money market portfolio, then you might be able to keep your stock portfolio as like literally just like whatever your matching is with your employer, or even zero if you don't have that. But regardless, the thing is if you do this the next 6 years, you're going to end up with $400,000, right? And we went from $36,000 a year to $53,000 a year in post-tax spending. The purpose of that is to develop a social circle so that you have and also like have some pleasure in your life, right? So that, also if you want to, in addition to having more friends and having more pleasure in your life, you can also potentially secure a long-term relationship, because securing a long-term relationship takes money. No matter if you're a woman or a man, this analysis is frankly assuming you're a male. The timeline works like pretty much if you're a male. If you're a female, this is going to be like really difficult to do. And honestly, you might want to spend more time in your first 6 years not focusing on earnings. Like if you're only making like 50 grand a year right now without taking on like extra work and working like 80 to 100 hours a week, if you're making like 50, your energy might better be spent actually like have a higher spending rate, but make sure you're spending that to secure like a high income man, because that's probably going to be better for your financial future than trying to do this plan, because you don't want to end up when you're 30. Like, I mean, being a woman who's 30 years old who has $400,000 is certainly not worth nothing, but you might be better off securing a higher, basically a higher income earning man, maybe by the time you're 23, 24, than trying to grind it out for 12 years and then end up with just money. A bit of a hot take potentially, but that's my perspective. So anyway, this is basically how you can get to 400K by the time you're 30, right? Starting at 18. And so what that allows you to do is achieve the American dream by the time you're 30 to 36, right? Like buying a house, if that's what you want to do. You don't have to do it, but you now will have the capital to do so, right? And if you think about it like this, right? Like let's assume that this money market portfolio, right? Like this is pretty much cash. This is like cash in short-term treasuries, right? So, if let's say you put, a third of this into your house, like your home equity, right? And like, let's say, I think these days they're spending, they're putting like 10 to 20% down, right? So this would actually enable you to buy a house that's worth $791, right? If you mortgage it. You could also just buy it outright for cash, right? If you wanted to. I think, if your money market is really giving you 2.5%, it might actually be a better use of your money to just buy the house in cash, because your appreciation rate on your house will be roughly that, but then you'll be able to save money without having a mortgage, and potentially you could also have like a lower insurance or something like that if you're not taking out a mortgage. Anyway, the thing is though, is like, so now that you have your 400, we're gonna say like increase your stock exposure to 70%, because the reason why is because let's look at and then your income will be like 115. We just took that from the number over there, right? So this 96 goes to 115. We just dropped that back here. And then at this point here, because once you have like 400, the reason why we're increasing the stock allocation is because we basically kept this really low so that you would have money guaranteed by the time you need to buy a house when you're like in your early 30s. So that's why we kept this low originally. We are going to increase this now because, like, let's say you have your house, right? Like, so instead of let's say instead of like maxing, or yeah, I mean, because this is basically the 195. I mean, this is basically what we did before. Basically, okay, yeah. So that's wait. Yeah, if you drain all your cash at this moment, you could buy like basically a $1.3 million house, which is crazy in my opinion, but that's a lot of house. But the point is, you could do that actually at this level. I think our numbers were slightly different before. My apologies on that. But the reason why we're allocating more into stocks right here is because if you look at the mathematical leverage, you'll see that like if we change our spending habits, if we do a 5% improvement in spending, we only get 6% increase in our ending net worth. But if we basically have a higher appreciation rate on our assets, then we're going to get a lot more bang for our buck, right? So, and this doesn't really this is in our control to allocate more to stocks than to cash. And so, basically this is the smart thing to do once you're like 30 is, you have your house already bought, and then you just like go straight into stocks. And the reason why, and people are going to say, oh, but compounding, right? Like literally it doesn't matter when you're like, if you don't have capital, it doesn't matter. Like if you just have like $1,000 when you're 18, putting that into stocks will do nothing for you. Okay. Well, hold up. Let's put like 100% of your savings in the stocks. That way we can like actually use the right numbers here. So your ending wealth here is going to be 14, right? We're pulling that over. And then this here is going to be 60. Okay, so that's the first 6 years. Then your second 6 years, right? So this is going to be worth 27. And then this is going to be 72. And so then your ending is 45, right? I mean, look at that, right? It's like 10% less. So I don't really care what you say about compounding, right? Like by the time you're 30, you're going to have $45,000 if you do this strategy, right? Where you don't change your spending and you just allocate more to your stocks. If you allocate 100% to your stocks and you change nothing else, you're going to have $45,000 when you're 30, assuming you're starting this when you're 18 versus $400,000. And I don't care what you say about the compounding math or whatever. It's just like, it's just not going to work in. But the point is like, if you want to do the slow lane approach, what it allows you to do here when you're like 30 is, you can buy a house. You can start a small business or a startup if you want to later on down the line. That honestly might, I mean, this is, there's definitely a lot of wisdom in that. Like you're going to have more experience. You're going to have, more connections, because in this 6-year period, you're going to be developing like a real social circle. You might be able to have children. Like, you can kind of choose between a small business and children, I think, at this point, because if you have been working as an employee for 12 years and you're kind of used to that and it's working for you, then if you increase the stress in your life by, having children, you're probably just going to stay as an employee. I think another thing too is like, within this 6-year period, you might not have to just like be grinding out, 80 to 100-hour work weeks. It's very possible that you're going to be able to get a higher paying job. And the other thing too, right, is when we do this to get to 600K, you actually get to raise your spending rate up to 85% if you want. And the reason I put that in there was because, if you're doing these things like having, small business or children, then there's like a likelihood that you're going to need more money to actually fund those things, especially if your small business isn't successful. Children certainly, I don't really have a lot of insight into, child raising outside of like New York City. So, maybe I'm overestimating how much you really need for it, but it also kind of depends on how many children you have, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, this was just kind of like a little exercise here using the Excel that we built last time, kind of just to show, that there's a path forward for people who are in their early 20s to achieve the traditional American dream. It's possible. You have to work a ton. I've worked harder than that. I've saved harder than that. um, you know, and so I feel confident saying, you can do this. I'm confident saying that it's possible. The issue is like it's not possible. It's literally mathematically impossible if you are a normal person. Like if you are making like average earnings, if you are spending in an average pattern, if you're, working an average amount, it's just not going to work for you. So if you want that traditional American dream, you're going to have to do some non-traditional strategies. And it's actually very simple, because if you don't have a lot of wealth when you start off, then there's really only one thing that matters, and that is uh, increasing your savings. That is the biggest thing you can do. And to supercharge that, we increase your income as well. Because if you look here, like what are the two biggest things that you can control? It's income and spending. Once you start getting into really high incomes, which is kind of why over here we have certainty and control on the income basis. We have those as half circles from like the last live stream. And the reason for that essentially is because once you start, like, there's only so many hours in the day, and so if you're trying to get jobs that like don't require extra education, that you can kind of pick up, you're kind of capped on this 30 to 40 per side hustle, 40-hour a week side hustle. And you can do things like Uber Eats or whatever and make $30,000 a year. People do that. The only thing, I think it's more realistic to take one of these jobs that I mentioned here. A lot of them have like non-traditional hours, bartending, post office, security guard, trucking to some extent. Trucking, that could just be your job. Like, that takes up so much time. But you can make 80K, 1 year into trucking. It's commonly done. So there are ways to do it. If you are young, if you have no education, if you have no connections, I will say there is a big sacrifice. We've talked about this, but I'm just recapping. The big sacrifice, of course, is you're giving up a lot of your free time. You are going to be working really hard. You are not going to be spending much money on things that will make you cope with the fact that you are working this hard. So it is actually a very emotionally and psychologically difficult thing to do, speaking from personal experience. However, what I will say is, and this might be a little cynical, and apologies for that, but you know, relationships, that's really what you're giving up, is relationships, I think, because the thing with pleasure is like it feels good in the moment, but it doesn't have a long-term return on your investment, right? And that might sound extremely robotic, and it's a mindset that I'm actually trying to, because at this point for me, I have enough money. Like I've exceeded the numbers we've been talking about here. So I have more than that. And so for me, like for instance, right? Like let's say, let's say you're making like 100, and you've got like $500,000, right? Okay. So, at this point, spending is like 6%, right? Like if I increase my spending, if I increase my savings rate by 5%, then my ending net worth in 6 years will be 6% higher, which is like 1% a year, which is like very little, right? And so for me, at this point, it makes like a lot of sense to focus really more on like actually developing a social circle. I have the capital to do that, and it's a what I give up is not really a huge sacrifice, like, if I take 5% of my, income, and I spend that on a social circle, I can actually develop like a lot of friends and connections and all that stuff, Whereas when I was just starting off and I had nothing, that 5% was extremely it was, uh it was a lot more precious to me, right? And so I think you can go back, and I think you can develop a social circle later on in life. It's more difficult, obviously. This analysis also assumes you're not going to college, and so I mean, a lot of people do maintain high school relationships, but a lot of people don't maintain that many. One of the things you just have to realize is human relationships, to a large extent, are driven by geographic proximity. So if you leave your hometown, you're going to lose a lot of friends. They're also driven to a large extent by mutual benefit, right? So if it isn't mutually beneficial for you and another person to be in a relationship, then the relationship's not going to last. People are basically, I mean, it's a competitive market, just like stocks or labor or anything. People go where the deal is best for them, the value is the highest. And so, if you're not providing the highest value in a relationship, then people are just going to go elsewhere. So, you know, that might be kind of cynical, I guess, and it is cynical. But I don't think it's inaccurate. So basically, the whole idea is like once you actually have a base of savings, which will enable you to buy a house, do all these things later, um, then you start focusing on what I consider to be luxury goods, which are friends. Which is it sounds crazy, but that is the way I think about it. And I guess as well is kind of like this isn't the way it should be. In a perfect world, it shouldn't be this way. Inflation is crazy. Wages are stagnant, and so those forces are driving this analysis, right? Where like in the past, if you go back to like the 70s or the 80s or whatever, like you could have friends and make an average wage and afford a house, before you're 25, and everything just kind of worked. It just like things are a lot harder now. And for that reason, people have to make more extreme sacrifices in order to achieve kind of those basic things that were easily attainable back in the boomer era. So I hope, judge me if you will, from my perspective, but that's basically what I did, and it can work for anyone. It's not something you want to do long term though. Like that's why I do bake in this, increased spending rate of 10%, which is actually huge.